I've definitely gone through some moments, I think we all do, when I've been afraid to fail. This often happens at the times when I'm at my worst, whether I'm, just tired or unhealthy or in a bad situation. But I've learned that failure is critical if you want to learn. The trick, though, is creating an environment that allows you to feel safe failing. And that's easier said than done.
That's Rick Lindquist, founder of LegUp Ventures and former CEO of Zane Benefits, which is also known as PeopleKeep. Rick was put at the helm of the company at the ripe old age of 22 and spent the next 10 years quickly learning and iterating in his role. From the highs and lows of that experience through the next phase of his career, he has gained an appreciation of the importance of learning from failure.
And the trick is to act quick and reflect on the learning so you can iterate your assumptions. So it's like assume something, act on it, reflect on it, and iterate those assumptions.
While that mindset and approach is something that many say they embrace, it isn't fully realized in a way that builds the right forward momentum. So what does it take to create an environment where failure isn't feared, but rather it's used as a building block for mindful learning for you and your organization? Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the show where we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders on how to break through business and career inertia so you can better understand the business of work. I'm your host, Connie Steele. Rick Lindquist was fortunate enough to find that unique work situation where the company mission and purpose aligned to something he was passionate about right at the start of his career. And that gave him the opportunity to take center stage, successfully building, scaling, and overseeing a company at an incredibly early age. But he was also later forced to make a pivot after being asked to resign from his CEO role in late 2018. Through all the ups and downs, the ability to fail fast and learn even faster was paramount to him and his company in terms of being able to grow. Now in his mid-30s and in the next phase of his career, he's focused on using what he has learned to help underdogs get a leg up as an entrepreneur, author, and consultant. In this episode, Rick shares his perspective on what it means to truly learn from failure for you and your business, and how to create that environment where this mindset and approach can thrive. Let's start off by learning about Rick's career journey, where he dreaded the thought of work because he thought he would hate it.
So I'm from North Carolina originally, and I went to college at Duke University, which is also in North Carolina. So I like to say I was all college. I graduated in 2007. I double majored in economics, computer science, and I even was in a fraternity, involved with student government, and wrestled on the wrestling team.
So you're busy. You kept yourself pretty busy in college.
Yeah, I was busy, and I had a lot of fun as well. So when I was graduating and going through those fun interviews you go through when you're a senior in college and you're trying to figure out what it means to become a real adult, I looked at, most people from Duke either go into investment banking or consulting or law school or med school. And I was looking at the investment banking route. And I remember being in New York City and just feeling exhausted and not having nearly enough energy to live there. And so I came back from that, and I remember calling my dad and saying, you know what, I think I need to take a year off. I'd like to go ski bum in Park City, Utah. And there was this long silence, and he basically said, well, as long as you're off the payroll, you can do it. He gave me, I think I graduated in May 2007, and my parents said, we are cutting you off July 2007, and I packed up a U-Haul and left, I think, July 27th. The part of the reason I moved to Park City in the first place to ski bum was I was afraid to go into work. I saw a lot of people, my dad being a major one, who didn't really like their job. I mean, he was a lawyer, he's a litigator, he fought for a living. He hated it. It drained him, and he had to travel all over the place. Sure, he provided great for our family, but he's not someone who I would say loved his work, right? And I'm sure he has moments. So I thought that once I joined the workforce, I would hate my life. I would hate working. But I got out there and I started carpet cleaning in the mornings. My uncle actually lives in Park City and owns a carpet cleaning business. So I learned all about that. And then I was a bellman at a hotel in the evenings. And I did that. I was planning to do that for, I don't know, at least a year and maybe go back to law school.
So you're figuring out what you really wanted to do during that time.
Yeah, exactly. Or more like not thinking about anything other than skiing and having fun and living in the moment. So anyway, I it was kind of interesting. I was doing that and I was perfectly content.
Then luck struck. Rick fortuitously met Paul Zane Pilzer, a well-known American economist, New York Times bestselling author, and successful social entrepreneur. Paul had just launched a new business called Zane Benefits and raised $3 million, which was completely unheard of in Park City at the time because
this was pretty unique at the time. Park City's a ski town, and at the time was pretty small, and there wasn't a whole lot going on from a professional standpoint. Most of the business community was focused on the tourism industry.
After reading one of Paul's most recent books called The New Health Insurance Solution, Rick was completely drawn in by the problem Paul was looking to solve. In fact, little did he know, he had found his passion and purpose.
So the problem that they were focused on solving was hey, basically he told me group health insurance, most of us get health insurance through our work when the company offers a group plan for everyone. He basically said that's the evil, most pernicious thing that we do in America. And his argument for that was when you get too sick to come to work, you get fired, you lose your job, and guess what goes with it? Your health insurance. And he thought that the solution was we should all buy our own health insurance independent of work, and then have the company reimburse us for it so that we can keep our health insurance when we switch jobs. And Zane Benefits had was building a software platform to make this happen. I fell in love.
Rick interviewed with Paul's company and landed his first professional job. He started in December 2007, a few months after getting the offer, as he negotiated a later start date so he could still enjoy being a ski bum. But when he showed up at Zane Benefits on his first day, many things had already changed.
I showed up in December, and news to me, Paul had been removed as CEO. He was still chairman, but a whole new management team had been hired and no one had told me. So I'm walking into my first professional setting with thinking I'm going to be working with Paul Zane Pilzer, this visionary entrepreneur. And I'm meeting new people that I never met during the interview process, and the company's gone through a lot of change in just 3 months. So
your first experience with complete change and uncertainty, even before starting a job.
Yeah, totally. And so it ended up being pretty cool because a lot of the executives the board had brought on were incredibly experienced. Like one woman who was a mentor of mine and still is, was the former CEO of United Healthcare Utah. And so there were, these great people. I was hired as an entry-level sales rep. So one of the problems that I'll talk about in just a minute was we weren't making any sales because no one was calling, right? And we had a major lead problem. So I had a lot of time.
Given that there weren't a lot of sales coming in, Rick proactively asked for and took on projects across the company. He was, and still is, a voracious learner. And contrary to what he originally thought, Rick realized he really liked working. He was drawn to the learning and problem-solving aspect of it. In fact, it was this addiction to solving complex problems that triggered his desire to seek out compelling projects. So in essence, he created opportunities for himself out of this desire to learn.
And I was just so stunned that I actually, was having fun working, that I went to all the executives and I would basically beg for projects and to help them what they were working on. So I did marketing projects, I did sales projects, I did compliance projects. And fast forward, 7 months, I'm one of the leading experts at the company and in the country on what we're doing.
But another change was coming that would quickly alter Rick's career trajectory.
October 2008 happens, the market crashed, and Paul, who's still chairman at the time, shows back up randomly one day. He pulls everyone in the company into a room and basically says, if I didn't talk to you 5 minutes before this meeting, you're being let go today. So 30-ish people, 25 people in a room get notified that they're being let go. I look over at one of my mentors, the woman I mentioned earlier. She's getting a little emotional, and I'm realizing, oh crap, everyone's go. The people I thought that would be here are gone. I'm one of the few people that are being kept. So I was in total shock. Paul eventually says, Rick, Ben, Tyler, stand up, get out of here. We were, 3 of the 5 people who he had talked to prior and and we were staying with the company. So we literally got up and exited the room. And that was one of the more traumatic personnel experiences I've been a part of. And definitely my first experience of seeing someone get fired. And I got to see it in like a mass shooting type scenario.
So not necessarily the best way of seeing people getting let go necessarily.
No, not at all. And looking back, like there's a lot of like there's pros and cons of the way that it was handled. But for me, it ended up being a blessing in disguise because Paul basically pulled his huddles together after he finished up in that room, and I realized really quickly, like the 5 people he kept were probably the cheapest people on staff. Right? We were all 22, 23 years old, and but we were all pretty bright. So like, and I would say bright. I would say we were all hard workers, and we were having some of the people having the biggest impact at the company at the time. So he basically says, guys, I got to be real with you. We have 6 months runway in terms of cash flow. So we're going to run the company through bankruptcy unless you guys can figure out how to make money. What do you need from me in order to get started? So Ben and Tyler were our software engineers. And Tyler and I had actually worked together a few months prior because we weren't making any money. We weren't making any sales. I had spent some time with him brainstorming. Hey, like I think if we took this approach, if we changed the way we were offering this product and the pricing and how we were distributing it, we could actually generate more leads, and I could do my real job, which is be a salesman. So we had actually gotten rejected on that proposal by the former executive team as stupid little kids who don't know what they're talking about. So we pulled that plan back out and we presented it to Paul, and he says, "Sure, how can I help?" And he basically said, help us with getting this going. And he worked with us for a little bit, and then basically let us just run with the plan. And the plan was, we at the time were focused on larger organizations, and we were the product that we offered was we would go into a company and we would say, "Hey, you offer group health insurance. It's bad. It's evil. It's crappy for employees. Switch to our solution, which allows you to reimburse employees for their own individual policies." And that wasn't going well because companies, when you're asking them to change what they're doing, it creates all kinds of abrasiveness for their existing processes and the employees. Think about how hard it is to go to 30, 100, 50, 500 employees and say, "Hey, we're changing your health insurance." Most people don't like it when health insurance changes. Imagine if you said, I'm taking it away so you can go buy your own health insurance. Not working. Actually, our proposal was let's focus on the small end of the market. We had done the research and we'd figured out that there were 5 million small businesses in the US with less than 50 employees. Half of them do not offer health insurance, or at the time did not offer health insurance to their employees. Why? It was too expensive. So these were people who wanted to offer health benefits, but could not afford to. So our solution was perfect. We weren't displacing something, we were creating more pie. We basically would go into these small businesses and say, "Hey, you don't offer benefits. Why not cost? We have a new way. Now you can offer benefits again and feel better about being a good employer." And in order to do that, we needed to build a new distribution model. So we ended up building all that out. Long story short, I effectively became the leader of that movement. Paul gave us a ton of room to try, iterate, fail. We grew the business over the next. We got cash flow positive in 3 months, and then grew the business from basically nothing to about 4 million, I think it was, in 2014 in revenue, and all bootstrapped, no more funding coming in. So it ended up being a huge success and kind of right place, right time situation for me.
So a lot of this sounds like career of trial by fire, it seems.
Oh, totally. It was all about learning quickly and iterating, and I certainly learned a lot from it.
During that decade-long tenure of running the company, Rick had learned on the fly how to be an effective leader of the business. This environment that Paul created, where it was okay to fail, led Rick and his remaining team members to be fearless. With a vision of what Rick and his partner in crime, Tyler, wanted to develop, and a thesis around why they thought it would work, they began building, executing, and trying everything. And even though they didn't know exactly how they're going to realize their vision, they had the tenacity to try because they were focused on the learning aspect of it, on the what would happen if. The company, initially given 6 months until bankruptcy, was turned around and thrived in this culture that had been created. But in October 2018, Rick was asked to resign from Zane Benefits, which was rebranded as People Keep. After 10 years at the company, he initially saw his removal as a failure and went through a lot of self-reflection. Since then, he's realized his fortunate career circumstance and finding that ideal marriage of company mission, personal passion, purpose, and profit for the business. And that, he finds, isn't easy to find or even create. And through that period of introspection, he's also learned what he could have done better as a leader and operator in those moments of adversity which weren't apparent at the time. But what is clear to him now is being able to develop and pursue interests where he can help underdogs succeed.
Now that I'm trying to create my next business, I'm realizing how lucky I was to have that purpose driving me, because it's really, really hard to create a situation where you can be super excited about what you're doing and motivated intrinsically to do it, but also make money. So in terms of what I'm doing now, I've started a company May 2019 called LegUp Ventures. I didn't know exactly what startup I wanted to create at the time because I was still in the search for just cause and purpose. So I knew that the theme of my life has been helping underdogs succeed. So I love the whole underdog story and working with small businesses to help them compete with big businesses, or helping minorities have a better shot. Or I love helping the little guy. My company is called LegUp Ventures, and it is basically an incubator for other ventures that I would want to start. So I've started 4 ventures to that end. One is the podcast Startup to Last, which explores how early founders can succeed without raising venture capital and build a company that lasts for a lifetime or multiple lifetimes. I have a company called Group Current, which is basically a company that provides outsourced management of communities and in member-based groups. We have a couple clients. One client is Pando Labs, which is Park City's entrepreneurial community. So if you're ever in Park City and want to come to an event, reach out to me. Third, I have a company called LegUp Health, which is in beta mode right now. And with that, I'm focused on helping people who work but don't get health insurance from work navigate their personal health care, starting with health insurance. So where People Keep was focused on the business side of things, helping the organization offer benefits when they couldn't afford it, I'm now turning my attention to the consumer side with LegUp Health and helping that consumer navigate their personal health care when they don't have health insurance at work. Finally, I've spent a lot of time writing and researching and consulting at ricklindquist.com. And so it's not really a venture. If I called it a venture, I'd call it ricklindquist.com. But basically, writing and researching other people's work on my main focus right now is emotions and leadership and the intersection between the two, and how we can better control our emotions as leaders.
Well, how else do you feel those experiences that you had shaped not only your mindset, but the way you approach what you're doing now and what you plan to do in the future?
Yeah, that's interesting. So in terms of mindset, I think I used to be more motivated by the thrill of competition. In other words, like playing these mini games and winning the games. So it was almost like not only was I motivated by learning, but I also wanted to be the best. So I think now I'm a little bit different. Now that I've had some success, I'm more motivated, and I've reflected on a lot of stuff, but now I'm more motivated by being my best self. So, and what I'm finding is that my best self is a constantly moving target. So the more I learn about myself, the more that I grow as a person, my best self bar raises. So this means I have to constantly invest in learning and continuous improvement, and it's a big part of what gets me out of bed in the morning. Is just how can I get better? How can I be how can I meet my bar today? And when I try to meet my bar raises. So it's like this vicious cycle of learning, if you will. I also have a much healthier appreciation for the importance of failure in learning. So I've definitely gone through some moments. I think we all do when I've been afraid to fail, and it's often this often happens at the times when I'm at my worst, whether I'm just tired or unhealthy or in a bad situation. But I've learned that failure is critical if you want to learn. The trick, though, is creating an environment that allows you to feel safe failing, and that's easier said than done.
This desire to continually improve oneself is something that many of us have. And as Rick has experienced, failure can provide many lessons. But not everyone fully understands what it means to fail fast and learn fast. So let's talk more about learning through failure because, certainly there's this ethos, particularly in the tech industry, where it's all about fail fast, fail often. But others may say it's really more about the notion of failing fast and learn faster to drive towards greater business success and just, I think, personal fulfillment. So how would you define it in mindset and approach?
Well, I don't love the saying because it's kind of confusing and can lead to misinterpretation, but I agree with the intent of the saying. I believe what's meant is that we should have a bias toward action, especially when there's massive uncertainty. So in business and in life, you operate with some amount of uncertainty at all times. In certain situations, you have more certainty, and other situations you have complete uncertainty. And like in business specifically, you have a startup, for example, that's early on has substantially more uncertainty than an established business like Johnson and Johnson. This this can apply to business, it can apply to our personal lives. We can't predict the future, but when things are uncertain, it's best just to make some quick assumptions based on what you know, and have a bias towards testing them quickly with action. And if those assumptions hold, great. Like we learn that something that may or may be more predictable about the future, but more often than not, we're going to be wrong about what we thought would happen. And the trick is to act quick and reflect on the learning, so you can iterate your assumption. So it's like assume something, act on it, reflect on it, and iterate those assumptions. And I think that's what's meant by ultimately fail fast and fail often. It's basically like try things, reflect on them, and then learn from them and iterate.
Do you feel it's a core tenet to operating a successful business and finding one's own personal success today, even more so today? And why?
If you want to grow, yes, it's a core tenet. I think that sometimes growth is a luxury. I think there are certain people in certain situations that don't have the luxury of focusing on that growth. And so I think sometimes you're in an environment where it's not safe to fail. If you're in that environment, the focus shouldn't be like getting comfortable with failure in that environment. It should be changing your environment. So that's a whole nother conversation. But assuming that you're in an environment that you've created for yourself, that where it's safe to fail, it's the way to grow.
As Rick says, you have to fail to grow. It's all about continuous improvement. But the freedom to try new things, even when it's instinctual to do so, can often be limited on a situational level. There are, however, ways to position yourself to allow for that mindful learning.
I totally think it's something that I think it could be learned. So, but I do, and I think it's natural for us to try things and learn. That's, if you think about the caveman type, learning through hitting rocks and playing with fire.
Yeah.
That's like the basic picture in my mind of learning through failure. I think how we are brought up and the situations that we're in today have a massive impact on our ability to apply this mentality. So, like school, for example, school teaches us experimentation. Basically, that's what all we're talking about here is ask questions and create experiments to answer them. So it's possible that maybe like a likeliness, people with this mentality are more likely to have a strong academic history because of what you learn in academics. I also think, though, that parenting has a huge role with it. I mean, you could ask yourself, did your parents teach you to ask questions and answer them for yourselves, or did your parents teach you to shut up and follow the rules? My parents, sometimes they told me to shut up and follow the rules, but most of the time they encouraged me questioning the rules and seeking the truth, and that leads to natural, trial and error. So I do think this mentality is natural to all people, but I do think it's something that we can have to relearn in certain situations.
What else do you think inhibits an individual from being able to learn from failure?
Well, I think kind of going back to the environment, I think when it's not safe to fail, you can fail all you want to, but you're probably not thinking and learning a lot from it. You're just trying to survive. When you're scared, you're focused on survival, not mindful learning. So if you're scared to fail, you're probably not going to learn from it. The trick is, I think, to set up situations where it's safe, where you allow yourself a situation in which it's safe to fail. Then you can actually take time to learn from it. It's easier for some people than others. I think the reality is the more privilege you have, the safer it is to fail. For example, it's much safer for me to fail than a minimum wage working single mom with 3 kids at home. I have a Duke degree, I have savings, I have employable skills that I've developed over a long period of time. I have successful friends and family members who can help me if something goes wrong. So, I think this is a complex challenge, but I guess the summary would be, if you want to speed up your learning, you have to make it safe. You have to create situations where it's safe for you to fail.
So what does it take to create those situations? Rick shares 3 things you can do to help you be more mindful in your personal as well as professional development.
One is interpersonal trust in your relationships. So if you don't trust the people you work with, you aren't going to feel safe working with them. And if you don't trust your spouse and friends, you aren't going to feel safe learning with them. So build trust into your relationships. The second is financial security. It's key. So if you're worried about putting food on the table for your kids next week, it's not safe to fail. I don't have a good answer for this. It's very situational and it's hard. But if you want to create a situation where it's safe to fail, you've got to have a way of creating some financial security for you and your family. The third is intentional reflection. So I'll just give an example for myself. Like I reflect probably on the side of too much, and it can make people uncomfortable when they work with me because I'm constantly looking for what the learning was. So I do this a lot, but just something as simple as one day a week, scheduling an hour to think about how you're doing relative to who you want to be and thinking about what you learned can go a long way into identifying learning opportunities from the failures that you've had this week. And so, I do that on Sunday mornings religiously. Sometimes I'm bad and I miss it. But if you can just make yourself look backwards and ask yourself some tough questions once a week, it's a great way to get started on learning from failure.
It's something really interesting that you had mentioned, where in certain instances in the situation that you're in, you're focused on survival versus mindful learning. Do you think this notion of mindful learning is part of the myth that people have about failure? Because failure can mean, well, I just screwed up. Now that I screwed up, like I'll just do something else again. Versus being very mindful of the lessons that came out of that failure and taking that into account and successfully putting that towards creating the right kind of momentum in the next stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we talked earlier about, act, make some assumptions, act, and then reflect. That reflection process is what creates the iteration of assumptions and the learning. And if you don't have an environment in which you have time to reflect and you you are able to like set aside time and really think, it's very difficult to learn from failure, if not impossible.
What else would you say are other situations or even myths that people have about failure? Anything else that comes to mind?
Um,
Or misconceptions for that matter?
well, I think one thing for me, for example, is I I used to say that I'm not scared to fail a lot when I was CEO of Zane Benefits and People Keep, and I think in reality I was scared to death to fail. And so I think people who say that they're not scared to fail are often lying to themselves. I constantly have something pulling at me that is what I would define as a fear of failure. And if you're not aware of that, it can lead to some behaviors that you don't realize are the result of that fear. And oftentimes when you're allowing yourself to feel that, it can cause you to act in a way that you don't even think is a good way to act, and that can lead to some really confusing emotions about yourself. So I think one myth is there are people out there who aren't afraid of failure. I think there are people out there I think everyone is afraid of failure. I think how we handle that fear of failure is very different.
In many cases, people are afraid to fail, contrary to what they may say. So, acknowledging this fear of failure and allowing yourself to reflect on your experience in order to do better next time is something that often has to be learned in the workplace.
I even think that sometimes I'll be doing a intentional reflection and I'll realize, man, I should have reflected more on this prior to this moment because I would have learned this quicker. So I don't think I don't do enough. I've hired people who don't do it at all, and it's a really powerful moment, oftentimes in our relationship and in their lives, when they reflect for the first time, like intentionally.
Why do you think they don't? Why do you think most people don't?
Well, there's a whole lot there too. I think this is not something that I've learned through school. I think this is something that I've somehow learned from other people who do this, from reading and from being around people who have taught me this. There's not a class on reflection that we go to in school. I think there should be, but I just it is not popular to when you're a kid and growing up to sit down and think about how you felt and what you did and whether it was right or wrong intentionally. It's not something that we do. So I think this is something that is not necessarily natural for us as humans and the creatures that we are, and it's something that until you're exposed to and taught how to do it, it's something it's hard to stumble on.
How would you teach somebody to do that?
I would. The way I've taught people in the past is forcing them, first of all, to take, I want you to take, I am going to force you to schedule time on your calendar every week. Okay. I want you to schedule an hour, and I want you to answer. I want you to walk through some questions to force you to think about them. And then you're going to come meet with me and talk to me about your reflection. So it's almost like a scheduled personal reflection and then a kind of a group reflection after that. And the people who are new to reflection, they struggle with what questions to ask themselves. And so they'll think they've reflected, and then they'll come into the group reflection. And oftentimes it's the questions that another person asked the person that really gets them to the point of, wow, that I didn't even think about asking myself that. So forcing people to schedule time and then getting in a room to talk about it with other people on more of a question-based session is the most successful way I've seen it done.
So if I were to even look at this as almost think of this as your career, your work life as a business. Do your own discovery, because that was that period of, say a consultant comes in, they do this discovery of your business. But this is the discovery on yourself. And then you have this period of analysis, but you're analyzing with other peers of yours, which leads to the insight. And once you get the insight, then you can create the roadmap.
Yeah, exactly. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the less help you need. But I still if I get stuck on something, I'll often post about it on social media, or I'll talk to my wife or my parents, or I'll send it to a friend and say, hey, like, can you help me think through this?
That process of reflection is what creates the subsequent iteration and assumptions and learning from them, as Rick highlighted earlier. Without that, it's difficult, if not impossible, to learn from failure. And while historically we all have had a bias to act and adjust, it's necessary for leadership to create a culture that empowers employees to make choices, take time to reflect, and learn along the way. So, other than environment, what other roadblocks inhibit this ability to fail fast and learn fast in organizations? And how can leaders break through them?
So some major organizational failures are just bad luck, right? And those situations are out of the company's control. But regardless, what we're talking about are really tough situations. So based on my personal experience, and I've read a lot about this in my time off over the last year, the best companies are able to handle these types of failures because they built a culture of trust. And that trust enables them to talk about the truth in real time. So I would say that lack of trust is probably the number one inhibitor in failure. And there's if you want to go a little bit meta on this, there is trust in self, and then there is trust in others. On a personal level, this applies in terms of trust in self. In an organization situation, it could be trust in the organization and trust in your coworkers. The other inhibitor, I think, from an organizational standpoint, is how you operate your organization. So, do you have a conservative financial strategy that allows you and your team time to work through an issue and big failure when it comes up and iterate through them and reflect? Or can a major failure cause you to miss payroll the next month? In other words, as an organization, have you made it safe to fail? And a lot of this comes back to financial strategies, and whether you're living on the edge as an organization or you're creating an environment where if something happens, you can bridge through it and learn.
So what I take away, it's how can you maximize the opportunity while minimizing the risk? And with that premise in mind, how does that translate into how people need to behave amongst each other, as well as what are those operational and sort of business/financial decisions and strategies that you make, which ensures everything aligns accordingly?
A lot of this has to do with the type of company you're working for or running. I think if you're operating a venture-backed company, meaning there are shareholders involved, oftentimes the mindset of the shareholder first mentality will dominate, and that will lead to situations in which the shareholder is more important than the worker, and that leads to, I think, failure is not an option type mentality. I think if you're in that situation, you should recognize that you're in the situation and embrace it. and failure may not be safe there. If you want to have a different environment, one, go start your own company, and and you can set your own standards and environment. Two, you can go work for a business that is owned by a few people. It could be a small business with a single owner. It could be co-founded, but they haven't taken shareholders, and they have a different mindset around what it takes to build a business. I actually, for example, my friend Tyler and I started a podcast. Tyler was the guy I worked with at Zane Benefits in the early days. He actually left to start a company called Less Annoying CRM. So he's the CEO of his own company. He is one of two shareholders with his brother. He totally operates the company on what we call a startup to last mindset, which is exactly the opposite of the venture capital mindset, which is startup to exit, startup to make money and return value to shareholders. He wants to just build a company that he enjoys working at that solves a problem for small businesses. And so through our weekly discussions, we're realizing that if you want to build something that lasts, you make very, very different decisions than a venture backed company because that would be focused on shareholder returns, and making it safe to fail at the organization level is at the core of the startup to last mentality.
And would you also say it's aligning to a common purpose for everyone?
Totally. Yes. I think at the end of the day, what I had at Zane Benefits that I took for granted while I was there, and now I'm experiencing it as I'm looking at other companies. We had a just cause. We had a reason that mattered, that made our work more meaningful.
When bad luck strikes your company, particularly when it's out of your control, it can certainly negatively impact the culture and approach of the organization. But there's an opportunity for business leaders to shape the operational foundation to weather the storm, in addition to creating that trust among employees. Yet, don't forget the type of company you work for, as that sets the stage for the failure is or failure is not an option mentality. And there are always situations where you can learn from failure in both a healthy and unhealthy way. So, what are examples where Rick learned that from a positive business scenario?
Paul, when he came back, like he did say that basically, we're going to run the company through bankruptcy if you fail. But Tyler and I were in a situation where we were pretty employable and we weren't scared of failing. So there weren't going to be any repercussions from Paul if we failed. He was just like, hey, do the best you can. And so it was very safe from, let's say, October 2008 through 2009 for Tyler and I to just try whatever we wanted to and not worry about anyone being critical of us other than ourselves. And that led to massive learning for both of us. And it led to the company succeeding. So that was my first experience of really feeling safe to fail and the benefits of it. I think that Paul created that for me, but I did not do a good job of, as we hired employees. I think we grew to like 60 employees at some point, 65 employees. And I think I did not do a good job of maintaining the environment that we had in those early days as we scaled, so that people, when they came on into the organization, they experienced what Tyler and I experienced. And, one, I just didn't realize it at the time it was important to do. But second, it's actually really hard to do. You have to really invest in it and make certain decisions to allow that to happen. Another good one was, I think it was Friday the 13th in September 2013, and the Affordable Care Act was about to go into effect January 1st, 2014, which is what people call Obamacare. And the IRS, Treasury, Department of Labor, and HHS, which is the Health and Human Services, I believe, and they basically said, hey, we are going to go after companies like Zane Benefits, and they issued a notice that basically called into question our entire business model, whether it was legal. And what ended up happening over the course of that weekend is we worked together to basically build a new product that complied with the notice and continue growing the business. And I think that was a moment where we were all able to get in the room together. We were able to talk about the truth. We were all realistic about being scared about it. And we just turned that into action and we iterated. And that moment, and then over the course of the next few months, set up, the next iteration of the company, which ultimately became PeopleKeep and is a profitable, cash flowing, growing business now.
There were also downturns in the business. Company growth flatlined as a result of compliance issues they faced with the Affordable Care Act. So what did Rick learn during those adverse scenarios?
What got us through that Friday the 13th thing was a lot of trust. But once we started going into 2014, things got really hard. People in the industry were telling us that we were illegal. New employees felt like they didn't understand what we were doing, and it was hard. And I pushed the company to the limits. I was comfortable operating the company on, hey, let's reinvest all of our cash into growth. And when we didn't hit numbers in 2016, we ended up raising money in 2015. we grew. We were spending more money than we were making, with the expectations that revenue would catch up, and that didn't happen. And I remember the layoffs. It was either Q1 2016 or Q1 2017 where I had to cut. We went from 60 employees, and I think I did it in two batches, where we went down from that 60, 65 employees to 20, 25 employees. And that was, at the time I made it happen because it was what needed to happen for the business to continue on. But looking back on that and taking time to reflect on it was probably one of the worst moments in my career, because I let a lot of people down that day and had to send them home and basically tell them good luck. And that was just that was a situation where we had created an environment where it wasn't safe to fail, and people lost their jobs because of it.
What do you think you learned the most during that period?
One, I want to build a startup to last company, and if people fail, I want them to know that it's not going to be, it's not going to upset me. I want to make sure that there's enough room. For me, I'm going to make sure that there's enough runway in the bank of any company that I create in the future that allows employees to make their own self-selection decisions on whether they want to be a part of the risk going forward versus having that decision forced upon them by the CEO. And I think the other thing that I don't talk about much, but I think is real. I think the way I handled at the time the layoffs as sort of like the status quo. We didn't hit our numbers. We just got to do this. And I think it was an opportunity. I think I would, if I ever had to lay off like that again, I would handle it very differently. It would not be transactional. It would be much more consultative with each employee. And so I didn't like how I handled those relationships through the layoff.
Sounds like you would shift the mindset or the action of being very transactionally focused to being very relationally focused.
Exactly. And hopefully I'm not in that situation again, but if I am, I will definitely be more relationally focused.
So with everything Rick has learned through his experience, what have been his personal takeaways to help his own development going forward?
So I have personally some financial security. I also learned how important trust is in relationships. So people in my life I have a lot of trust with, starting with my spouse. So I think I have a personal environment right now that makes it very, very safe for me to fail. And part of that is luck and just having some success, but also it's very intentional. I'm very intentional about protecting that environment for myself and my spouse so that we can try things and fail. And so I'm in a situation now where I am running a lot of experiments, and the consequences of those experiments are learning. They're not fail. It's totally safe for any of these experiments to fail. And so I'm really happy right now. And most of my fear is around how to protect that environment and give it extend the runway of that environment for my entire life and for my kids and for my wife and not will my startup succeed? Will my podcast get listeners? I don't really worry about that stuff.
Sounds like it's about creating that optionality for yourself so that you can test and learn and try to see what sticks.
If an opportunity presents itself, I'm in a position to take advantage of it. This reminds me actually, there's a concept of luck where, I talked earlier about bad luck. Bad luck can kill you. Bad luck in a personal life can kill you. I mean, just think about what happened to Kobe Bryant in the last couple of weeks. So, I mean, bad luck can literally kill you. It can kill your organization. But good luck rarely is the sole reason for success. What you have to do is put yourself in a position to weather the bad luck and then have the choice to take advantage of the good luck. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is creating an environment where it's safe to fail, but also it's you're in a position to take advantage of good luck when it comes your way.
So, how has your definition of career success evolved from your earlier days to now?
I think at some point I stopped being motivated by money. I don't know what that point was, and it's always uncomfortable to talk about money, isn't it? We were kind of trained like you can't talk about how much you make and money. So at some point I'll just keep it to I made enough money where it was like, okay, I don't care if I make any more money. I also think that being my best self will lead to good relationships, and good relationships lead to career success. And so I'm. It seems, I think, really selfish now that I'm talking about it, but I'm pretty focused on maximizing my own potential. And I hadn't, I guess, I guess I assume that if I do that, everything else will take care of itself.
And what's been the best work advice you've ever gotten, and why?
Two things come to mind. One is a saying. It goes: control, profitability, growth. And it's sort of like the nail it, then scale it, but I find it much more useful. This was given to me by one of the investors at Zane Benefits and People Keep, and a board member. And he said, I won't do his voice, but he basically goes, Rick, it's all about control, profitability, growth. You don't worry about profitability until you have control, and you don't worry about growth until you have profitability. And I think that this is something that can apply to business, but also anything that you're working on. A lot of times we worry about optimizing things before we understand how they work, and that's what control means. Profitability is around, does it make money? Is it optimized? And you want to make sure you get things working the right way before you move to growth, which is scale it, make it go big. And so I constantly find myself when I'm working on something, going, do I have control of this? Okay, great. Is it optimized? No, I got to work on that. And then, is it ready to grow? Oh, I'm growing it. And I constantly am asking, even when I'm growing something, do I still have control and profitability? If I don't, maybe I need to slow down on the growth. That's a great, a great piece of advice that I think if people think about it enough, they'll find a lot of use in it.
Absolutely, because it definitely has a dual meaning for not just a business, but your personal life as well.
Exactly. And then the second, and this is something that I think, I don't know that anyone's ever told me this with these words, but it's something that I think I've learned and I totally agree with. It's swim in small ponds. So what does that mean? This can be applied to both business and it can be applied to your personal success. So swim in small ponds. You want to be a big fish. When you're first starting something, you want to be a big fish in a small pond. Guess what? It creates, say, failure. You're going to stand out. You're going to be in a situation to get opportunities. And you can create these small pond situations, both in personal life and at work. So for example, as I think about my startups, I'm not like at LegUp Health, I'm not going out to the market to start saying, hey, if you have your own health insurance, call me, I'll help you buy health insurance. That's what every health insurance service person in the US is doing. Instead, I'm saying, hey, I am looking for Utah working people who buy their own health insurance because their company does not offer benefits and they're passionate about healthcare. I've now made the pond of people I can serve really, really small and specific. And now because I'm speaking to those people, I'm going to stand out to them. That's an example of creating a small pond. In personal life, it can be as simple as, let's say I want to learn how to play basketball. Are you going to play with the, former college players at the YMCA, or are you going to the intramural, co-ed league for fun? Start in the co-ed league. don't go play with the former college players at the YMCA. And so, once you master, if you can create a small pond, you'll get confidence. You'll be safe to fail. You'll succeed, and then you can go find a bigger pond. And so, start in small ponds, work your way up into bigger ponds, and then eventually you'll be playing in the whole, in
the big days.
Yeah, the big oceans.
And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Best way to connect with me is at my personal website at ricklindquist.com. I've actually put a page this week dedicated to how people can help me and how I can help them. It's at ricklindquist.com/help. Check it out, and I'd love to hear from you. I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Thanks so much for your time today. I loved the discussion on really how to think about learning from failure and what it means, how you really could take it to heart, and how you implement it to truly move everything in your life, personally and professionally, forward.
Oh, thank you, Connie.
Learning from failure isn't about failing and just doing it again. Rather, it's about making assumptions, quickly acting and reflecting on them, and then iterating. It's this notion of mindful learning with a bias towards immediate action. But you have to set up an environment where it's safe to fail. And that applies not only professionally, but personally. And that environment may not always be under your control. So you have to build a culture of trust while establishing operational and financial strategies that can help you manage the inevitable downturns of the business. At the end of the day, remember that to successfully fail fast and learn fast, you must practice intentional reflection so you can truly see those valuable insights and lessons learned, which will help you pivot, adjust, and propel you and your business forward. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with Rick on his website, ricklindquist.com. That's RICKLINDQUIST.com. He's also on Twitter and LinkedIn. Just search Rick Lindquist. And if you like what you heard, please share this podcast with others so they too can benefit from Rick's perspective and advice. To get show notes, links, and more tips and advice from this episode, you can visit us at strategicmomentum.co. And we'd love for you to not only subscribe to the show, but also contribute to the great work and career advice we've collected over the years. And don't forget to follow Strategic Momentum on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. You can also join the Facebook community by searching Strategic Momentum in groups. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.